based on the impulse momentum theorem, why might a boxing glove soften the blow of a punch? So, in thinking about how to answer this, we might like to do a comparison of a punch with a boxing glove on versus a punch without a boxing glove on. But we need to be very clear about how we're doing that comparison. We're only going to be looking at the effect of the boxing glove. We're not going to assume that the person, when they're not wearing the boxing glove, does something to maybe pull the blow because they're worried about hurting someone. In that sense, I've heard in discussions in the past that there are statistics showing that with boxing gloves, there may actually be more injuries than without a boxing glove. I can't remember the exact details. That was something a student told me at one point in relation to this question. But we're not asking about okay, what are the effects going to be in reality on people doing these kinds of activities, boxing kinds of sports, if we give them gloves versus not giving them gloves. We're being asked a much more physical kind of question, which is if you take one punch with a boxing glove and then you take the same punch without a boxing glove, can we explain why we know that if it's the same punch, that with the boxing glove, it's going to not feel as hard? That's what we mean by softening the blow there. So to answer that question, I'm going to model this punch. I'm going to say, let's say that this maybe point-like object here represents a fist. Maybe it's on an arm, right? Maybe here it's connected to somebody's shoulder, right? But I'm going to model this as the punch is coming in with a certain velocity. There's a certain amount of mass behind it. In other words, maybe I can associate a certain amount of momentum with this punch. And when the blow lands, that momentum is being transferred into the target, right? Discussion that has also come up is what is this mass? I kind of put it over here. Is the mass of the fist? Well, I think anyone who knows anything about how to punch well, whether it's in boxing or anything else, knows that it shouldn't be the mass of the fist, because really a good punch has the whole body behind it. Although whether it's the mass of the whole body or just some part of it is maybe debatable. But anyways, that's just the way I'm modeling it though. So since there's a certain amount of momentum associated with this punch, I'm going to think about this in light of impulse momentum theorem, partly because that's what the question says to do, right? I mean, it references it right there. So we know that theorem says that impulse is equal to a change in momentum. And in this case, the way I'm going to look at this is the change in momentum really represents the total amount of momentum contained by the punch. So I'm going to look at that as maybe being the difference between that and zero. I'm assuming all of that momentum is kind of delivered in the punch. I'm not necessarily going to worry too much about minus signs and what's final and initial here, and did I get all that correct? I haven't even written vectors here, which maybe I should have, but I don't know if I need it. But I want to relate, so again, this MV, this kind of really represents just the punch, right? That's what I'm associating with that side of the impulse momentum theorem. But how do I answer the question about why the blow might be softer when there's a boxing glove? Well, let's look at impulse, right? Impulse, we know, is defined by average force multiplied by a time, or maybe a time interval during which the momentum transfer takes place. And in this case, the argument I'd like to make is that since the boxing glove is a softer material, it's basically going to increase the value of delta T. In other words, the effect of the glove, if I were to kind of label it here, so putting on a glove increases this. And if it's the same punch, regardless of whether there is a glove or not, if the product of force and time has to be equal to a fixed amount of punch, in a sense, right? Then that amount of force must decrease. So literally, the punch feels softer because less force is going to be applied. So let's see how that relates to the answer here. It says, comparing the same blow with and without a glove, the momentum in the punch is the same for either case. The glove makes the time of impact longer, which for a given momentum change makes the force applied by the punch smaller. And it does note here that this answer does not account for pugilists throwing harder punches as a result of wearing gloves, or moreover not pulling the punch, because that's what that example talking about, like, hey, maybe statistically there are more injuries if people are wearing gloves, or at least so I've been told, versus not wearing gloves. That's because the people are actually doing something different based on whether they're wearing gloves or not. And that's not really a fair physical comparison of what the intended like effect of the glove is.